Imagine waking up tomorrow and every single animal on Earth has vanished overnight. No cows, no horses, no bees, no dogs, no fish, nothing. Just you, some plants, and a terrifying amount of silence. How long do you think you'd last? A week? Maybe 2? Here's the thing. Most people would say, oh, I'd just eat plants and figure it out. And sure, that sounds reasonable. Until you realize you can't plow a field without an ox. You can't cross a river without a horse. You can't even keep your crops alive without insects pollinating them. Suddenly your optimistic little survival plan starts looking a lot more like a slow, hungry, very cold death. But this isn't just a hypothetical. This is literally what ancient humans faced. Every single day. For hundreds of thousands of years. Their entire civilization, everything they built, everything they ate, every war they won, every winter they survived, was completely and utterly dependent on animals. And what's wild is that most people have no idea just how deep that dependency actually went. When people think about animals and ancient humans, the first thing that comes to mind is meat, hunting, spears, big hairy mammoths. Sure, that's part of it. But focusing only on meat is like saying electricity is only useful because it powers your phone. Technically true, but you're missing about 99% of the picture. Let's talk about calories first, because without calories, you're dead. Simple as that. For most of human prehistory, before agriculture really took hold around 10,000 years ago, humans were hunter-gatherers. That means every single day was a negotiation between find enough food to survive and don't get eaten by something that's also trying to survive. And here's the brutal reality of plant-based foraging. Plants are nutritionally unreliable. Yes, berries and roots and tubers are great, but they're seasonal. They disappear in winter. They vary wildly by region. And crucially, they don't provide nearly enough fat and protein for a human brain that needs to run at full capacity. The human brain is a calorie-destroying monster. It consumes about 20% of your total energy just sitting there doing nothing. And to build and maintain a brain that size, you need animal fat. Researchers who study prehistoric diets have found that the dramatic expansion of the human brain, the thing that made us, is directly correlated with increased animal consumption. Hunting wasn't just a hobby, it was the biological fuel for human intelligence itself. And then there's the fat question. Fat is not just a macronutrient. For ancient humans, fat was survival currency. When winter came and temperatures dropped and plant life died, the only reliable calorie-dense food source available was animal fat. A single large kill, a bison, a mammoth, a deer, could provide enough calories and fat to sustain a group of humans for days or even weeks. Without that, you starve. Your body starts breaking down muscle. Your organs start shutting down. Your immune system collapses. And you die, probably while being very cold and very confused about where all the berries went. But here's where it gets even more interesting. It's not just about the meat itself. When ancient hunters made a kill, they didn't just eat the meat and walk away. That would have been insane wastage that no sane person living on the edge of survival would ever commit. They used everything. Bones, smashed open for marrow, one of the most calorie-dense foods that exists in nature. Bone marrow is basically nature's butter, rich, fatty, incredibly nutritious. And there's evidence that early humans were cracking open animal bones for marrow long before they even had sophisticated tools, like hundreds of thousands of years ago. Hides? That's clothing, that's shelter, that's bags for carrying things. Without animal hides, you cannot survive a winter in most of the northern hemisphere. You cannot insulate yourself sufficiently with plant material alone. Leaves are not a coat. Bark is not a blanket. Ancient humans knew this. Modern humans wrapped in their tech fabric puffer jackets have largely forgotten it. Sinew and tendons? That's rope. That's bowstring. That's the thread that holds your clothing together. Without animal sinew, you can't make a bow. Without a bow, your hunting range drops dramatically. Without hunting range, your food options collapse. It's a cascade. Stomach. And bladder, water containers, cooking pouches. Ancient humans figured out incredibly early that you could fill an animal's stomach with water and use it to transport liquid over long distances. You could drop hot stones into it to boil food. This wasn't cooking. This was engineering. Bones themselves, tools. Needles made from bird bones, hooks made from fish bones, blades made from animal ribs. Some of the most sophisticated early tools humans ever made were not stone. They were bone. Stone tools get a lot of press, but the bone tools, criminally underrated. Fat from animals, fuel for lamps. This one is huge and almost always forgotten. Without animal fat to burn, ancient humans had no reliable light source in darkness. You cannot have a functioning society, you cannot have art, you cannot have planning, you cannot have complex social organization if everyone goes completely blind and helpless the moment the sun goes down. Animal fat lamps were literally the thing that extended productive human hours beyond daylight. In some ways, animal fat was the first electricity. Oh, and one more thing. Manure. Not exactly glamorous, but when you transition into early agricultural societies, animal manure becomes the primary fertilizer that keeps your crops alive. Without it, soil loses its nutrients and you get crop failure after crop failure until you're back to starving again. So, yes, poop was also civilization critical. You're welcome for that image. Around 10,000 to 15,000 years ago, something happened that fundamentally rewired the trajectory of human civilization. Humans started domesticating animals. Now, this sounds simple. Oh, they just decided to keep some animals around. No. No. This was not a casual decision. This was the most important strategic pivot in human history, and it happened gradually, messily, and with a lot of trial and error, most of which probably involved someone getting bitten. The first was the dog, and the timing here is deeply fascinating. Dogs were domesticated somewhere between 15,000 and 40,000 years ago. Estimates vary from gray wolves. And think about why. Dogs gave ancient humans something extraordinary. An early warning system, a hunting partner, a herder, and eventually a guard. A dog's nose is so incomparably superior to a human's that having one in your group was essentially having a biological security camera that also helped you track prey. The groups that had dogs were immediately, dramatically more effective at surviving than the groups that didn't. Then came goats and sheep, around 10,000 years ago. Goats are the ultimate survival animal, by the way. They are extraordinarily hardy. They'll eat almost anything. They provide milk, meat, hide, and horn. If ancient humans had a Swiss Army knife in animal form, it was the goat. And milk, this needs its own moment. Milk was transformative, because milk means you have a continuous, renewable food source that doesn't require killing the animal. You can sustain your herd and still eat. That's a completely different economic logic than hunting, and it changed everything about how human settlements were structured. Then cattle. Then pigs. Then horses, and horses deserve their own entire section, honestly. But before we get there, let's talk about something that doesn't get nearly enough credit. The psychological and social effect of animal domestication. When humans started keeping animals, they didn't just get a food source, they got a buffer against uncertainty. Sudden famine, slaughter the livestock, harsh winter. The animals kept going even when the crops failed. Drought, move the herd. The whole concept of wealth in ancient agrarian societies was literally measured in animals. In ancient Sumeria, in ancient Egypt, in ancient Ireland, in ancient India, cattle were currency. Sheep were savings accounts. Your herd was your bank. This is why cattle raiding was such an enormous part of ancient warfare. You weren't just stealing food, you were robbing someone's entire economic system. If you had to pick one animal whose domestication most dramatically accelerated human civilization, the answer is almost certainly the horse. The horse was domesticated on the Eurasian steppe, probably around 3,500 to 4,000 BCE. And almost immediately, it became a game changer in every domain of human life simultaneously. Warfare first. Before the horse, armies walked everywhere. An army that walks can cover maybe 25 to 30 kilometers a day on a good day. An army on horseback? Dramatically more. The Mongol armies, for example, could reportedly cover 100 kilometers or more per day at full gallop when necessary. The introduction of horses into warfare didn't just make armies faster. It completely restructured military strategy, supply lines, the concept of surprise attack, and ultimately which cultures and civilizations rose to dominance, and which ones got absolutely steamrolled. The chariot, essentially a horse-powered weapons platform, was the ancient world's equivalent of the tank. Civilizations that had them and mastered them were almost invincible against civilizations that didn't. The Hittites, the Egyptians, the Assyrians, the mastery of horse-based warfare was the single biggest military advantage in the ancient world for over 1,000 years. But war is only part of the story. Trade and communication. Before the horse, information traveled at walking pace. Goods traveled at walking pace. This meant that empires were limited in size because you can't effectively govern territory that's weeks of travel away. The horse compressed distance. It allowed messengers to carry critical information faster, allowed merchants to move goods over longer distances, allowed imperial administrators to actually visit the edges of their territory before they died of old age. The Persian royal road system, stretching over 2,500 kilometers from Susa to Sardis, was only functionally useful because it was maintained for horse riders. A road system built for walkers would have made it slightly more convenient to stroll very slowly to your death. Agriculture. Draft horses, larger, more powerful breeds developed specifically for farm work, could plow a field dramatically faster than oxen. They were faster, they covered more ground, and over time they allowed farmers to cultivate more land with the same workforce. More land, more food, more food, more people, more people, more civilization. The plow horse is one of the most underrated forces in agricultural history. And psychologically, the horse gave ancient humans something profound: speed as power. For most of human existence, humans were relatively slow animals. We're not the fastest. We're not the strongest. We don't have claws or venom. But put a human on a horse and suddenly you have a creature that can outrun almost anything, cover enormous distances, project force in a completely new way, and, let's be honest, look absolutely terrifying to anyone who's never seen one before. There are historical accounts of indigenous peoples who had never encountered horses reacting with absolute terror to mounted conquistadors. Some thought the horse and rider were a single creature, some kind of god monster, which, from a pure physics standpoint, a charging cavalry horse kind of is. Okay, so we've covered the big dramatic stuff: hunting, domestication, horses, warfare. But let's take a moment to talk about the animals that ancient humans depended on in ways that were quieter, more subtle, and honestly even more fundamental. Insects, specifically bees. If you think humans domesticated bees just because they liked honey, and honey is delicious, we're not going to pretend it isn't, you're missing the bigger picture. Beeswax was one of the most versatile materials in the ancient world. It was used to seal wood and waterproof it. It was used as a lubricant for tools and machinery. It was used to make candles that lasted longer than animal fat lamps. It was used in medicine as a base for ointments. It was used to write on wax tablets, which were essentially the ancient equivalent of dry erase boards and the backbone of administrative record-keeping before paper became widespread. And the honey itself. Before refined sugar, honey was the only reliable sweetener available in most of the ancient world. But more importantly, honey doesn't spoil. Like, ever. Archaeologists have found honey in ancient Egyptian tombs that's over 3,000 years old and still perfectly edible. For ancient people who constantly struggled with food preservation, the ability to store honey indefinitely was almost magical. It was also used as an antibiotic. And it works, by the way. Modern medicine has confirmed that honey has genuine antimicrobial properties. Ancient Egyptians were putting honey on wounds thousands of years before anyone discovered penicillin. Then there are the silkworms, which single-handedly created one of the most important trade networks in human history, the Silk Road. Literally named after the product of a caterpillar, the Silk Road connected China to Rome, moved not just silk but ideas, religions, diseases, technologies, and mathematics across entire continents for over 1,000 years. All because someone in ancient China figured out that a small moth larva spins threads that can be woven into fabric so extraordinary that people on the other side of the world would pay absurd fortunes for it. Carrier pigeons. Before telecommunications, before radio, before the telegraph, if you needed to send a message over long distances quickly, You used a pigeon. Military commanders used them to coordinate troop movements. Merchants used them to communicate price changes before rivals could react. In World War I, not ancient history, but the principle is ancient. Carrier pigeons saved entire battalions by delivering messages when all other communication had broken down. One pigeon named Cher Ami famously delivered a message that saved nearly 200 trapped American soldiers despite being shot through the chest during the flight. A bird saved 200 people just doing its job. Oxen and donkeys. Unglamorous. Largely ignored in popular history. Absolutely essential. These animals were the trucks, the cranes, the forklifts, the construction equipment of the ancient world. Every pyramid block that was moved, every harvest that was carried to the granary, every heavy timber that was dragged to build a ship or a house or a temple, all of it was powered by these animals. The entire physical infrastructure of ancient civilization was built on their backs, literally. And now here's the part that most people don't think about. Ancient humans didn't just use animals. They worshipped them. And that's not a coincidence. When your survival is completely dependent on something, you don't just respect it, you elevate it. You mythologize it. You make it sacred. The ancient Egyptians had gods with animal heads, Anubis with the jackal's head, Horus with the falcon's head, Sobek with the crocodile. These weren't random. Each of these animals represented something the Egyptians genuinely depended on and feared and marveled at. The jackal was the scavenger, the creature that patrolled the boundary between life and death. The falcon had the sharpest eyes in the sky and was the ultimate symbol of royal power. The crocodile controlled the Nile, the river that gave Egypt its entire civilization. The bull, Apis, the sacred bull, was literally worshipped as a living god in ancient Egypt, treated with more reverence than most humans, because cattle were that central to survival. In Hinduism, the cow is still sacred today. And people sometimes mock this without understanding where it comes from. In ancient agrarian India, a cow was not just a food source. It was a milk machine, a manure factory, a plow engine, and a sacred symbol of abundance all in one. Killing a cow was economically irrational, like burning down your house to stay warm for one night. The religious protection of cattle was, at its root, a very rational economic policy dressed in spiritual clothes. The Norse had Odin's ravens, Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, who flew across the world every day and brought back information. A mythological surveillance network made of birds. In a culture where information and intelligence were survival tools, of course the gods used ravens. The Native Americans of the Great Plains had the buffalo at the absolute center of their spiritual and material world. The buffalo provided food, clothing, shelter, tools, fuel, and spiritual meaning simultaneously. When the buffalo were systematically slaughtered by settlers in the 19th century, tens of millions killed in just a few decades, it wasn't just an ecological catastrophe. It was a deliberate act of civilizational destruction, targeting the single animal that an entire culture depended on for everything. Animals weren't just resources in the ancient world, they were mirrors, they were metaphors, they were partners, they were gods. And the fact that humans elevated them to that status tells you everything you need to know about how dependent on them we truly were. We live in a world now where most people are genuinely disconnected from this reality. Your food comes wrapped in plastic from a supermarket. Your clothes are synthetic. Your light comes from a wire in the wall. You can go your entire life without ever directly depending on an animal for your survival. But that disconnection is new. Incredibly new. Like, embarrassingly recent in the timeline of human history. For over 300,000 years of Homo sapiens existence, every single one of your ancestors was in a direct, daily, life-or-death relationship with the animals around them. The knowledge of how to track prey, the skill of reading animal behavior, the understanding of which parts of an animal to eat, how to preserve the meat, how to tan the hide, how to render the fat. This wasn't trivia. This was the curriculum of staying alive. And here's what's genuinely worth sitting with. Every time you've ever been comfortable, Every time you were warm, every time you weren't hungry, every time you had enough calories to think clearly about something beyond immediate survival. You were standing on the shoulders of a relationship between humans and animals that goes back further than language, further than art, further than civilization itself. The first alliance humans ever made wasn't with each other. It was with the animals. And in the most literal sense imaginable, that alliance is the reason you're here right now. The reason you can read, write, build, think, and ask existential questions about your place in the universe. Instead of shivering somewhere in the dark, desperately trying to figure out where the mammoth went, is because somewhere along the line, your ancestors figured out that they needed animals more than they could ever fully repay. And honestly, that's kind of beautiful.